"Mom," my son said, with a smile so calm it chilled me to the bone. "You don't need a will anymore." The room went silent. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips as I searched Ethan's face for a hint that he was joking. Lauren lowered her eyes without saying a word. Then, before I could ask what those terrifying words meant, the front doorbell rang. The color drained from Ethan's face. Whoever stood on the other side of that door wasn't supposed to arrive, and somehow I knew my life was about to change forever. If you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart only to question everything in a single moment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments what you think Clara should do next. And if you enjoy emotional family stories filled with suspense, unexpected twists, and hard-earned justice, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the rest of this journey. The drive home that night felt longer than it had any right to. Charleston streets shimmered beneath the soft glow of antique street lamps, and Spanish moss swayed gently from ancient oak trees lining the road. Normally, the familiar scenery calmed me. That evening, it felt strangely distant, as though I were watching someone else's life through a fogged window. "You don't need a will anymore." The sentence echoed in my mind with every mile. Perhaps Ethan had meant something innocent. Maybe he had been trying to say that he would always take care of me. Maybe I had misunderstood. But mothers develop instincts that don't disappear with age. They sharpen. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I wasn't trying to convince myself that everything was fine anymore. I was trying to understand why my own son had looked frightened when the doorbell rang. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside the house that had been my sanctuary for nearly 35 years. Every room carried pieces of my life. The framed photographs lining the hallway showed Ethan growing up one birthday at a time, from a gap-toothed third grader proudly holding a homemade science project to a confident young man standing in his graduation gown outside the University of South Carolina. In almost every picture after the age of 8, there was only one parent smiling beside him: me. His father, David Warren, had died from a sudden heart attack when Ethan was still a little boy. One ordinary Tuesday morning, David kissed us goodbye before leaving for work. By lunchtime, he was gone. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. I still remembered Ethan sitting on the edge of his bed that night, clutching his father's baseball glove. "Who's going to teach me to drive someday?" I had wrapped my arms around him, fighting tears I couldn't afford to shed. "I will. And throw football. I'll learn. And fix things. I'll learn that too." I kept every one of those promises, some better than others. I became mother and father overnight. At 35 years old, grief wasn't something I had time to process. Bills continued arriving. The mortgage didn't pause because I was mourning. Neither did the grocery store or Ethan's growing appetite. I returned to teaching only 3 weeks after David's funeral. During the day, I taught history to restless teenagers. At night, I tutored students online and spent weekends grading papers for extra income. There were evenings when I didn't climb into bed until after midnight. Then my alarm rang, again at 5. People often praised me for being strong. They never saw the moments when I sat alone in the laundry room because it was the only place Ethan couldn't hear me cry. Money was always tight. When Ethan was 12, he wanted to attend a summer science academy. The tuition cost more than I earned in 2 months. Without telling him, I sold the pearl necklace David had given me on our 10th wedding anniversary. It had been the last expensive gift he'd ever bought me. I cried after handing it to the jeweler, but I smiled when I surprised Ethan with the acceptance letter. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You always make everything possible, Mom." I believed that was enough. Years later, Ethan earned a scholarship to college, but there were still expenses the scholarship didn't cover. Housing, books, transportation, meal plans. I accepted additional administrative responsibilities at school and postponed retirement far longer than I had originally planned. Friends suggested I think about myself for once. Instead, I thought about Ethan's future. When he graduated with honors in finance, I sat in the audience with tears streaming down my face. As he crossed the stage, he searched the crowd until he found me. He pointed toward me before accepting his diploma. After the ceremony, he wrapped me in the biggest hug. "We did it, Mom." No, He had done it. I had simply walked beside him, or so I believed. Years later, Ethan established himself as a financial advisor in Charleston. Clients trusted him. Neighbors admired him. He bought a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood with Lauren, whom he'd met through mutual friends. Lauren was polished, articulate, and always seemed impeccably composed. She worked in luxury real estate and had an effortless elegance that impressed everyone she met. At first, I genuinely liked her. She remembered birthdays, sent flowers on Mother's Day, invited me to dinner. She called me Mom within a year of their wedding. I thought I'd gained a daughter. Looking back now, I wondered how much of that warmth had been genuine. About 6 months earlier, subtle changes had begun. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would alarm an ordinary mother. Ethan started asking questions, lots of them. "So, have you updated your will recently?" I laughed. "Why are you asking about something so depressing?" He smiled. "I'm a financial advisor, remember, estate planning matters." It sounded reasonable. Another afternoon, while helping me carry groceries inside, he glanced around the house. "You know, homes in this neighborhood have really gone up in value." "They have." "You've probably got a small fortune sitting here," I chuckled. "It's just a house." He looked at me strangely. "No, Mom, it's an asset." I hadn't thought much about the difference. Weeks later, over lunch, he casually asked about my retirement accounts, then my investment portfolio, then whether my life insurance policy was still active, then which bank managed my trust account. Each question came days apart. Each sounded harmless. Each had a logical explanation. I never imagined they formed pieces of a larger puzzle. If one conversation had included all those questions, I might have become suspicious. Instead, they arrived one by one, scattered over months, like tiny raindrops before a storm. Friends occasionally joked that Ethan must already be planning his inheritance. I always defended him. He's looking out for me. He's making sure everything is organized. That's just how financial advisors think. I never allowed anyone to criticize my son, not once. Even when my closest friend, Margaret Ellis, quietly remarked during coffee one afternoon, "Clara, sometimes people ask about money because they're worried about money." I smiled. "Ethan's doing very well." Margaret stirred her tea thoughtfully. "I hope you're right." I was absolutely certain I was, until tonight. Standing alone in my quiet kitchen, I opened the refrigerator and poured myself a glass of cold water. My hands trembled just enough for a few drops to spill across the countertop. For the first time in decades, I replayed every recent conversation with Ethan through different eyes. Every question, every visit, every unusually generous offer to help organize my paperwork, every reminder that I should simplify things. None of it had seemed dangerous. Now every memory carried a shadow I couldn't ignore. I walked into my study and opened the drawer where David had always kept our important documents. My will rested exactly where it had for years. I placed my hand on the folder but didn't open it. Instead, I stared at our wedding photograph sitting beside the lamp. David's warm smile looked exactly as I remembered. "You always told me to trust people," I whispered into the empty room. Then I found myself saying something I never imagined I would say aloud. But what happens when the person you trust most is your own child? I had no answers, only questions. And somehow, deep inside, I knew those questions were about to lead me somewhere I never wanted to go. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ethan's voice again. "Mom, you don't need a will anymore." By dawn, I had convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. After all, Ethan wasn't some stranger I had met a few years ago. He was the little boy who used to crawl into my bed after thunderstorms because he believed monsters disappeared whenever I held his hand. People didn't simply wake up one morning and become capable of betraying their mothers. At least that was what I desperately wanted to believe. The next morning, I busied myself with chores around the house. I watered the roses David had planted before he died. I folded laundry. I reorganized the pantry. Anything to keep my mind from replaying that dinner. Around noon, my phone rang. "Ethan," the screen read. I hesitated before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." "Morning, Mom." His voice sounded cheerful, almost too cheerful. How are you feeling today? I'm fine. You seemed a little tired after dinner. I suppose I was. There was a brief silence. Then he said exactly what I feared he would. I've been thinking, maybe we should finally get all your paperwork organized. I leaned against the kitchen counter. What paperwork? Oh, you know. He laughed lightly. The usual things. What usual things? Your insurance, your investment accounts, the house, and maybe your estate documents. There it was again. Estate, will, inheritance. The conversation had found its way back to the same place. I've already organized everything, I replied calmly. I know, but some of it is old. I'd feel better if we updated everything. His wording caught my attention. I'd feel better. Not you'd be protected. Not it's safer. It was about easing his mind. I'll think about it. You don't have to think too much. Lauren and I can come by tomorrow evening. We'll help. Help. The word suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. I reluctantly agreed. After hanging up, I stood motionless for several minutes. Something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't looking forward to seeing my own son. The following evening, Ethan and Lauren arrived carrying a leather portfolio and a laptop. Lauren greeted me with her usual polished smile. Hi, Mom. She hugged me briefly before setting the portfolio on my dining room table. I even brought coffee from your favorite cafe. Normally, that thoughtful gesture would have warmed my heart. Instead, I found myself wondering whether kindness had become part of a carefully rehearsed performance. We chatted casually for almost 20 minutes. The weather, neighborhood gossip, a new restaurant downtown, everything except the reason they had come. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. So, I figured we could take care of some paperwork while we're all together. Lauren immediately opened the leather portfolio. She spread several neatly arranged documents across the table. Every page already had colorful sticky tabs attached. Several signature lines had been marked with bright yellow arrows. This won't take long, she said. What exactly am I signing? I asked. Oh, nothing complicated, she smiled reassuringly. Just updates. I reached for the first document. Before I could read more than the title, Lauren gently slid another page over it. This one first. I blinked. I'd like to read them in order. Of course. She laughed softly. I just didn't want you to get overwhelmed. Overwhelmed, I had spent 38 years reviewing educational policies, employment contracts, and district budgets worth millions of dollars. Reading legal documents had practically been part of my profession. I don't mind taking my time. For a split second, Lauren's smile tightened. Only for a moment, then it returned. Absolutely. She handed me another page. Again, several paragraphs had been highlighted. Only the highlighted portions, not the entire document. I slowly began reading. The wording seemed unusually broad. There were references to financial management, authority, decision-making, emergency circumstances. The language felt far more complicated than ordinary updates. What exactly does this authorize? I asked. Ethan answered quickly. It just lets me help if something ever happens. What kind of help? Oh, he shrugged. Paying bills, talking to banks, managing investments, if you're ever hospitalized. Reasonable answers. Yet something still bothered me. I continued reading. Every few minutes, Lauren gently interrupted. Oh, that section isn't important. You can skip that paragraph. The attorney uses standard language. You don't need to worry about those pages. The more she encouraged me not to read, the more determined I became. I reached another document. As I lifted it, Lauren instinctively placed her hand over the bottom page, just for an instant. Then she quickly removed it. I'm sorry, she said. I thought that was mine. But there had been nothing underneath except more paperwork. Why hide it? I looked at Ethan. He avoided my eyes. That unsettled me more than anything else. Throughout his childhood, Ethan had never been able to lie without looking away. Whenever he broke a lamp or forgot his homework, his gaze always drifted toward the floor. Some habits never truly disappear. I slowly placed the papers back onto the table. I think I'd like copies. Lauren blinked. Copies? Yes. I'd like to review everything over the weekend. Silence. Ethan forced a smile. Mom, these are pretty standard. I understand. I still want copies. Lauren folded her hands together. The documents aren't finalized yet. That's all right. I'd still like copies. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, Ethan sighed. It would honestly be easier if we finished tonight. I'm not comfortable signing anything I haven't reviewed. You trust me, don't you? The question landed harder than he probably intended. Of course I trusted him, or at least I always had, but trust should never require blind signatures. I do trust you, I answered quietly, but I also believe important documents deserve careful reading. Lauren spoke before Ethan could. What if we scheduled another meeting after you've looked everything over? I'd appreciate that. She began gathering the papers much faster than she had unpacked them, almost hurriedly. One page accidentally slid onto the floor. I bent down to pick it up. Before I could read more than a single line, Ethan reached it first. I've got it. His voice came out sharper than expected. We both froze. He immediately softened his tone. Thanks, Mom. He slipped the paper back into the folder without allowing me another glance. My heartbeat quickened. Something on that page mattered, a great deal. They finished packing within minutes. Lauren smiled again. We'll come back next week. I'm sure everything will make more sense then. After they left, I remained standing beside the dining room table. The house suddenly felt unnaturally quiet. Then I noticed something. A small yellow sticky note had fallen beneath one of the chairs. It must have slipped off one of the documents. I picked it up. Only 2 handwritten words appeared on it. POA nothing else. No explanation, just 2 letters. I didn't recognize the abbreviation, but something told me I needed to find out exactly what it meant. Instead of searching online, I reached for my phone. There was only one person whose judgment I trusted completely when legal matters were involved. Jonathan Hayes. He had represented David and me for nearly 3 decades. If anyone could explain what Ethan was asking me to sign and why they had seemed so determined to keep me from reading every page, it was Jonathan. For the first time since David's death, I realized I needed someone to protect me. Not from strangers, from the people I loved most. I called Jonathan Hayes the moment his office opened the next morning. He answered on the 3rd ring. Jonathan Hayes. Jonathan, it's Clara. There was a brief pause before his warm voice softened. Clara Warren, it's been too long. It has. Everything all right? I looked down at the yellow sticky note resting beside my coffee cup. I'm not sure. He didn't ask questions over the phone. Can you come in this morning? I'll make time. Thank you. And Clara, yes, bring every piece of paper they asked you to sign. I hesitated. I don't have them. They wouldn't let me keep copies. Silence. Then Jonathan said quietly, I see. His office overlooked Charleston Harbor, occupying the 2nd floor of a restored 19th century brick building David had always admired. Walking through those familiar wooden doors felt strangely comforting. Jonathan had handled every important legal matter for our family. When David died unexpectedly, Jonathan had guided me through probate. When I refinanced the house years later, Jonathan reviewed every document personally. When I retired from teaching, he organized my trust and estate plan. More importantly, he had been David's closest friend since law school. If David trusted anyone besides me, it had been Jonathan. His receptionist greeted me with a sympathetic smile before leading me into his office. Jonathan stood as I entered. At 71, his silver hair had become thinner, but his posture remained as straight as ever. He walked around his desk instead of waiting behind it. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. So am I. He motioned toward the leather chair across from him. Tell me everything. I started with the dinner. Ethan's strange remark, the unexpected doorbell, the paperwork, Lauren's insistence that I skip certain sections, their refusal to leave copies, the sticky note. Jonathan listened without interrupting. Only once did he reach for a yellow legal pad to jot down a note. When I finally slid the sticky note across his desk, he adjusted his glasses. POA, he sighed quietly. Power of attorney. I thought that might be what it meant. It usually does. What exactly is it? Jonathan leaned back in his chair. A power of attorney is a legal document allowing another person to act on your behalf. Is that unusual? No. In fact, it's often a very good idea. I frowned. Then why do I suddenly feel like something's wrong? Because context matters. He folded his hands together. If someone honestly wants to protect you, they'll encourage you to read every word. They'll suggest independent legal advice. They'll never rush your signature. They certainly won't refuse to leave copies. I stared at the floor. I thought maybe I was overreacting. I don't think you are. His answer came without hesitation. That frightened me. Jonathan opened a drawer and removed a thick sample binder. He flipped it through several pages before stopping. This is a standard financial power of attorney. He pointed to several highlighted paragraphs. Depending on how it's written, the person receiving authority could, he counted them carefully, access bank accounts, manage investments, sell real estate, sign contracts, move money, communicate with financial institutions, and make very significant financial decisions. I looked up sharply. They could sell my house. If the document grants that authority, and if I signed it, potentially. The room suddenly felt smaller. I've known Ethan his entire life. I know. I can't imagine him wanting something like that. Jonathan's expression remained calm. I'm not accusing your son. I'm simply telling you what certain legal documents can accomplish. He paused before continuing. The question is why they didn't want you reading them. That question settled heavily between us. Jonathan reached for another folder. I'd like to ask you something. Anything. When was the last time you updated your estate plan? About 6 years ago. And who knows the details? You, my accountant. And Ethan knows he's my beneficiary. Jonathan nodded. Has anyone else contacted you recently about your estate? No. He frowned slightly. Interesting. What is... He opened his computer and searched through several files. After a few moments, he turned the monitor toward me. My office received a phone call 3 weeks ago. I blinked. What kind of phone call? Someone claiming to be you. I felt my stomach tighten. What? The caller wanted to schedule an appointment. For estate revisions. I never called. I know. He rotated the monitor farther so I could read the notes. The receptionist had documented everything. Caller identified herself as Clara Warren. Requested urgent appointment. Wanted beneficiary adjustments. Would call back. No appointment completed. Jonathan looked directly into my eyes. After nearly 30 years representing you, I knew something wasn't right. Why, you've never called me Mr. Hayes. I smiled faintly despite everything. I always call you Jonathan. Exactly. The caller repeatedly addressed me as Mr. Hayes. A chill crept down my spine. So someone pretended to be me. It appears that way. Do you know who? No. But whoever it was understood enough about your affairs to sound convincing. He printed the phone log. The incoming number had been blocked. No caller identification. Nothing useful. This could simply be coincidence, Jonathan said carefully. But combined with everything you've told me, I don't believe it is. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question neither of us wanted to answer. Do you think Ethan made that call? Jonathan chose his words carefully. I don't know, and I won't speculate. What I do know is that someone attempted to begin changing your estate without your direct involvement. He leaned forward. That alone concerns me. So what do I do? You don't accuse anyone. You don't confront anyone. You certainly don't sign anything. I nodded. What else? We gather facts. Quietly. His voice remained calm, but there was unmistakable determination behind it. I'd also like someone else to review this. Who? A forensic document examiner. I looked puzzled. Forensic. He specializes in signatures, handwriting, altered documents, fraud detection. His name is Michael Brooks. The best in South Carolina. I had never imagined needing someone like that. Jonathan picked up his phone. Michael and I have worked together before. He owes me a favor. Within minutes, Michael agreed to meet us that afternoon. As Jonathan ended the call, he looked at me thoughtfully. Clara, yes, I have another recommendation. I'm listening. Until we understand what's happening, Don't mention today's meeting to Ethan. You think I should keep this from my own son? I think you should protect yourself. The distinction hit me harder than I expected. Protect myself. From Ethan. The words felt almost impossible to accept. Jonathan stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the harbor. You know what David used to tell me? I smiled sadly. He told everyone something. Jonathan laughed quietly. He once said that your greatest strength wasn't your intelligence. It wasn't your kindness. It was your patience. I remembered. David used to say I never made important decisions while emotions were running high. Jonathan turned back toward me. Use that patience now. Don't assume. Don't panic. Don't ignore what you're seeing either. I took a slow breath. I understand. As I prepared to leave, Jonathan handed me a business card. His personal cell number was written across the back in blue ink. Day or night. If Ethan asks you to sign anything, you call me first. I slipped the card into my purse. For years, Jonathan had protected my family's future. Now, for the first time, it seemed he might have to protect me from my own family. As I walked toward the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Morning, Mom. Lauren found another copy of the paperwork. We can stop by tonight if you're ready to sign. I stared at the message for several long seconds. Then I looked back at Jonathan's office window. Something told me this wasn't just about paperwork anymore. Someone had already started moving pieces across the board. I simply hadn't realized I was part of the game until now. I didn't answer Ethan's text immediately. Instead, I sat in my car outside Jonathan's office, staring at my phone while the harbor breeze rocked the branches overhead. The message itself sounded harmless. Morning, Mom. Lauren found another copy of the paperwork. We can stop by tonight if you're ready to sign. If I had received that text just 1 week earlier, I probably would have invited them over without a second thought. Now every word seemed carefully chosen. Not once did Ethan ask how my appointment had gone. Not once did he wonder whether I wanted another attorney to review the documents. His only concern appeared to be getting my signature. I typed a short reply. Let's wait a few days. I've been feeling tired lately. Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed again. No problem. Just don't put it off too long. That last sentence lingered in my mind. Don't put it off too long. Why was time suddenly so important? Over the next several days, I began doing something I had never imagined doing. I quietly observed my own son, not with anger, not with suspicion alone, but with the careful attention I used to give difficult students during my years as a principal. Sometimes the truth wasn't hidden in what people said. It lived in the small things they didn't realize anyone noticed. Ethan started calling almost every day, sometimes twice. He had never called that often before. Just checking in. Need groceries? How's your back feeling? Did you remember your doctor's appointment? The conversations were pleasant, almost overly pleasant. Each one eventually drifted toward the same subject. So, have you looked over those papers yet? Every single time. Lauren's behavior changed as well. She began sending me articles about estate planning, videos explaining why seniors should simplify their finances, stories about elderly people who became victims of fraud because they waited too long to organize their affairs. She never directly mentioned the documents. She didn't have to. The message remained the same. Sign, soon. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I received another surprise. Ethan appeared at my front door without calling first. I was in the neighborhood, he said with an easy smile. I thought I'd check on you. I invited him inside. He carried 2 bags of groceries and a bouquet of fresh tulips. Your favorites. Thank you. For nearly an hour, we talked about ordinary things, a football game, neighborhood construction, his latest clients. For a while, I almost convinced myself Jonathan had been overly cautious. Then, Ethan wandered into my study. The room had always been my favorite place in the house. Books lined every wall. David's old writing desk sat beneath the window. Family photographs filled the shelves. When I entered, Ethan was standing in front of the small fireproof cabinet where I kept important documents. He wasn't touching it, just looking at it. He quickly turned when he heard my footsteps. I forgot how organized you keep everything. I smiled politely. Old habits? He laughed. I guess principals never really retire. His eyes drifted toward the cabinet one more time. So, is that where you keep everything? The question came so casually that someone else might have missed its significance. What do you mean? Oh, he shrugged. Important papers. The will. The trust. The house deed. I kept my expression calm. Some things. He nodded thoughtfully. You know, if anything ever happened unexpectedly, it might take me weeks to figure everything out. There it was again. Not concern. Inventory. I gently changed the subject. Would you like more coffee? His smile returned. Sure. As I walked toward the kitchen, I felt something inside me growing colder. 3 days later, something happened completely by accident, or perhaps fate finally decided I had ignored enough warning signs. I had volunteered to bring homemade pecan pie to a neighborhood fundraiser. While loading the pie into my car, I realized I'd forgotten the folding tables stored in my garage. As I opened the garage door, my phone rang. Margaret Ellis. We chatted for nearly 15 minutes. By the time I hung up, I noticed another vehicle pulling into my driveway. It was Ethan's SUV. He stepped out quickly. I thought I'd help you carry everything. That's sweet of you. Together we loaded the table. Then Ethan offered to return a toolbox he'd borrowed months earlier. It's still in the back. I'll grab it. He opened the rear cargo area. Several folders slid forward onto the pavement. Careful, I said. I've got it. As Ethan hurried to gather the papers, one thick envelope landed several feet away. The wind carried it toward me before either of us could react. Instinctively, I bent down and picked it up. Across the front were large red letters. Final notice. Below that, mortgage delinquency. The envelope wasn't addressed to a business, it was addressed directly to Ethan Warren. For just a fraction of a second, our eyes met. His face turned pale. He quickly reached for the envelope. That's nothing. I'll take it. I handed it over without saying a word. He forced a laugh. Administrative mistake. They've already fixed it, I nodded. I'm sure. But the explanation didn't fit. The envelope had been unopened. Another folder had partially spilled open. Inside, I caught sight of additional documents. Loan statements, past due balances, collection notices. Ethan shoved everything back into the cargo area almost frantically. Sorry. My office is a mess lately. No worries. He smiled again. Too quickly, too brightly. After he left, I stood alone in my driveway, replaying those few seconds. Mortgage delinquency, final notice, collection letters. Jonathan had asked me one question that morning. Why would Ethan suddenly need your signature? Perhaps I had just found part of the answer. The following evening, I attended a charity gala hosted by the Charleston Education Foundation. Hundreds of familiar faces filled the ballroom. Teachers, business owners, former students. While waiting in line for coffee, I unexpectedly recognized one of Ethan's longtime friends, Mark Benson. They had attended college together. Mark greeted me warmly. Mrs. Warren. It's been years. It has. How's Ethan? The question seemed innocent enough. Mark hesitated. I haven't seen much of him lately. He's been busy. So I've heard. There was an awkward pause. Then Mark lowered his voice. I probably shouldn't say anything. My heart skipped. What is it? He looked around before answering. I hope everything works out. What do you mean? I know he's been under a lot of financial pressure. I remained perfectly still. What kind of pressure? Mark immediately looked uncomfortable. I assumed you already knew. Knew what? He sighed. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought it up. Before I could ask another question, someone called Mark's name from across the room. He apologized again and walked away. I watched him disappear into the crowd. Financial pressure, mortgage delinquency, collection notices, daily phone calls, constant questions about my estate. For months I had believed these were unrelated events. Now they were beginning to connect, like scattered puzzle pieces slowly revealing a picture I desperately wished wasn't real. That night, lying awake in bed, I found myself asking a question no mother ever wants to ask. Was Ethan trying to protect his future, or was he trying to save himself with mine? I spent the next morning sitting on my back porch watching the sun rise over the marsh beyond my property. For years, mornings had been my favorite part of the day. The world felt honest before everyone rushed into it. Now even the bird song couldn't quiet the questions filling my mind. Ethan was in trouble. That much seemed undeniable. But financial trouble alone didn't explain everything. It didn't explain the phone call made in my name. It didn't explain why Lauren had tried to keep me from reading legal documents. It certainly didn't explain why they refused to leave copies behind. Someone had crossed a line. I just didn't know how far. At precisely 9 o'clock, Jonathan Hayes called. "I've been waiting to hear from you," he said. "I have something to tell you." "So do I." I described finding the mortgage delinquency notice in Ethan's SUV, my conversation with Mark Benson, and the increasingly frequent phone calls from Ethan. Jonathan listened carefully. When I finished, he remained quiet for several moments. "Everything points in the same direction," he finally said. "What direction?" Desperation. "Not necessarily criminal intent, but desperation." He paused. "Unfortunately, desperation often causes good people to make terrible decisions." I hated how reasonable that sounded. I still don't want to believe Ethan would intentionally hurt me. I understand. But belief isn't evidence. We deal with facts. His calm professionalism grounded me. So what happens now? I've already spoken with Michael Brooks, the forensic examiner. Yes, he'd like to begin immediately. What does that involve? He'll compare any documents we eventually obtain. He'll also examine handwriting samples if necessary. And Jonathan hesitated. "I'd like permission to quietly review whether anyone has attempted to contact financial institutions on your behalf. You can do that with your written authorization. I'll sign whatever you need." This time, he said gently, "You'll actually have time to read it first." Despite everything, I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd managed in days. That afternoon, I returned to Jonathan's office. Michael Brooks was already waiting. He looked nothing like I had imagined. Instead of the stern investigator I'd pictured, he was a friendly man in his mid-50s wearing wire-rimmed glasses and carrying an old leather briefcase. He stood as I entered. "Mrs. Warren." "Please call me Clara." "It's nice to meet you, Clara. I wish it were under better circumstances." "So do I." After introductions, Michael spread several folders across the conference table. "I'd like to explain what I do. I examine questioned documents, signatures, alterations, printing patterns, ink analysis, electronic document histories, anything that helps determine authenticity." I listen carefully. You really can tell if something has been forged, more often than people realize, especially when someone believes they're being clever. Jonathan added, "Michael has testified in federal court dozens of times." I suddenly felt grateful they were taking this seriously. Michael slid a blank sheet of paper toward me. "I'd like a few handwriting samples." "What should I write?" "Anything." He smiled. "Your grocery list. A favorite recipe. Even today's date." I spent several minutes writing naturally. When I finished, Michael carefully placed each page into a protective folder. "Now," he said, "if any questionable documents appear later, we'll have reliable comparison samples. Simple, professional, methodical. Exactly what I needed." Before I left, Jonathan handed me another folder. "I'd like you to do a little homework." Inside was a checklist. It included every important financial account I owned: checking, savings, brokerage accounts, retirement investments, insurance policies, property records. I want you to verify everything: passwords, beneficiaries, mailing addresses, contact information. If anything looks unfamiliar, tell me immediately. That evening, I sat in my home office for nearly 4 hours, one account after another. Most looked perfectly normal until I reached my primary investment account. Near the bottom of the profile page, I noticed something unusual: authorized contact. I frowned. I didn't remember adding anyone. I clicked for more details. The name displayed wasn't Ethan, nor Lauren. It simply read, "Pending authorization request submitted 12 days earlier. Status awaiting customer confirmation." My pulse quickened. I had never requested authorization for anyone. I immediately called the financial institution. After several security questions, a representative reviewed the account. Yes, Mrs. Warren. There was an online request. I never submitted one. We noticed the verification wasn't completed, so no changes were made. Who submitted it? I'm sorry. We can't disclose that until our fraud department completes a review. I'd like to report it. Of course. Within minutes, a fraud investigation had been opened. I wrote everything down. Time, representative's name, reference number. Then I called Jonathan. I found something. The following morning, Jonathan reviewed the information. This is exactly why I wanted you checking every account. So someone really tried. It appears someone began the process, but fortunately they couldn't finish it. Could it have been a mistake? It could. But mistakes don't usually happen alongside impersonation calls and rush legal documents. His words made perfect sense. They also broke my heart. Over the next week, I quietly strengthened every layer of security around my finances. New passwords, multi-factor authentication, updated recovery contacts, fresh security questions. Jonathan recommended placing temporary alerts with my banks. I agreed. None of those changes affected my daily life, but together they built a wall around everything David and I had spent 40 years creating. For the first time, I realized protecting my legacy wasn't just about preserving money. It was about protecting the sacrifices behind it. Every dollar represented something: an extra teaching assignment, a canceled vacation, a birthday gift I had skipped buying for myself, a weekend tutoring instead of resting, David's overtime shifts, our dreams, our future. Those weren't just assets. They were memories. Late Friday afternoon, Ethan called again. Hey, Mom. Hi. I haven't seen you all week. I've been busy. Everything okay? Just organizing some things, he laughed. Funny. So have I. There was a pause. Then he casually asked, Have you decided about the paperwork? Not yet. You've had plenty of time. His tone remained pleasant, but beneath it I heard something new. Pressure. Subtle. Controlled. Persistent. I'll let you know. Another silence. Then he said quietly, I just don't want anything unexpected to happen. Neither did I, but I suspected we meant very different things. After we hung up, I stared at the family portrait hanging above my fireplace. It had been taken 5 years earlier. Ethan stood beside Lauren with his arm around my shoulders. All three of us were smiling. Looking at that photograph now, I couldn't help wondering which version of my son was real. The man in the picture, or the man who kept asking me to sign documents I wasn't allowed to read. Jonathan had told me to gather facts. Little by little, the facts were gathering themselves. And with every new piece of evidence, one terrifying realization became harder to ignore. Whatever Ethan and Lauren were planning, they weren't acting alone anymore. Someone else had already begun helping them. Jonathan's last sentence stayed with me all weekend. Whatever Ethan and Lauren are planning, they aren't acting alone anymore. I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to believe we were reading too much into scattered events, but every new discovery made that harder. On Monday morning, Jonathan called and asked if I could meet him and Michael Brooks at his office. There are a few things we've uncovered, he said. His voice was measured, but I had learned enough about Jonathan over the years to recognize when he was choosing his words carefully. I'll be there in 30 minutes. When I arrived, Michael was already setting up a laptop in the conference room. Several folders lay neatly arranged across the polished oak table. Jonathan waited until I sat down before speaking. We've made progress. I took a deep breath. What did you find? It isn't direct evidence against Ethan. Not yet. But it explains why someone might suddenly become desperate. He slid a newspaper clipping across the table. The headline caught my attention immediately. Low Country Horizon Development Files for Chapter 11. Protection, I frowned. I've never heard of them. You wouldn't have. They're a private commercial real estate development company. Jonathan opened another folder. Over the past 3 years, they raised money through private investors. They promised exceptional returns. Luxury waterfront condominiums, mixed-use retail space, marina expansion. Everything had looked impressive on paper. Then construction delays began. Interest rates climbed. Major investors withdrew. Within months, cash flow collapsed. The company is effectively insolvent now, Jonathan explained. I listened patiently, still unsure why any of this mattered. What does that have to do with Ethan? Jonathan looked toward Michael. Michael rotated the laptop so I could see the screen. Several publicly available corporate filings were displayed. One name had been highlighted: Ethan Warren. I stared at it. No. He invested? Michael nodded. Not just invested. He became a limited partner. I looked back at Jonathan. I thought he mostly managed retirement accounts. He does. But according to these filings, he also invested substantial personal assets into this development. How substantial? Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed me another document. It listed secured commercial loans, personal guarantees, financing agreements. I didn't understand every financial term, but one number stood out. $1,850,000 personal guarantee. I blinked several times. There has to be some mistake. Jonathan quietly shook his head. A personal guarantee means he agreed to become personally responsible if the project failed. Nearly $2 million. Potentially. I couldn't speak. Ethan earned an excellent living, but nothing remotely close to that. Why would he do something so reckless? Jonathan folded his hands. Because successful investments often convince intelligent people they're smarter than risk, and because optimism can become dangerous. I leaned back slowly. My son, the careful analytical financial advisor, had gambled his future. Michael opened another document. This is where things become more concerning. He pointed toward a series of business entities connected to the failed development. One consulting company appeared repeatedly, LWM Strategic Holdings. What is that? Michael answered. A consulting firm. Who owns it? He clicked another page. Several names appeared. One of them made my stomach tighten. Lauren Michelle Warren. I looked up sharply. Lauren owns part of the company. 35%. I never knew. Most people probably didn't. Jonathan spoke gently. According to public filings, Lauren wasn't merely aware of the investment. She was financially connected to it. Suddenly, dozens of conversations from the past year replayed inside my head. Lauren encouraging Ethan to pursue bigger opportunities. Lauren insisting they deserved a larger home. Lauren joking that retirement was for people who thought too small. At the time, I had admired her ambition. Now I wondered whether ambition had quietly become obsession. Jonathan reached for yet another folder. This doesn't prove fraud, but it does explain motive. He placed a timeline in front of me. The dates spoke louder than any explanation. January, construction delays announced. March, major lender withdraws. May, cash flow problems become public. June, collection actions begin. July, someone impersonates Clara Warren. 3 weeks later, power of attorney documents appear. Estate discussions become urgent. I stared at the timeline for a long time. Everything lined up, not perfectly, but closely enough to make my chest ache. It all started after the business collapsed. Jonathan nodded. That's our assessment. I whispered almost to myself, so Ethan wasn't planning this for years. I don't believe so. What changed? Fear. On the drive home, I found myself thinking less about betrayal and more about desperation. I remembered Ethan calling me 2 years earlier after landing a major client. "Mom, I finally feel like I've made it." His excitement had been contagious. I had been proud, maybe too proud. Had success slowly convinced him he couldn't afford to fail? Had embarrassment kept him from asking for help before everything spiraled out of control? By the time I reached my driveway, my heart felt heavier than ever. Understanding someone's motives didn't erase the damage they were willing to cause. It simply made the tragedy more complicated. That evening, another unexpected piece of the puzzle arrived. Margaret Ellis knocked on my front door carrying homemade banana bread. "I baked too much again," she joked. We settled onto the back porch with coffee. For nearly half an hour, we talked about ordinary things. Finally, she looked at me carefully. "Something's bothering you." I hesitated. I can't explain everything. You don't have to. She reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. I just want you to know something. What? I ran into Lauren about a month ago. My attention sharpened. Where? A charity auction downtown. What happened? Margaret looked uncomfortable. She didn't know I was standing behind her. She was talking with another woman. I only overheard a few sentences. What did she say? Margaret took a slow breath. She said, "If this doesn't work, we'll lose everything." A chill ran through me. I assumed she meant business. I didn't think much of it, she paused. But then she added something strange. What? Margaret frowned, trying to remember the exact words. I think she said, "His mother is the only safety net we have left." Neither of us spoke. The evening air suddenly felt colder. Margaret looked genuinely upset. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." "No." I managed a weak smile. "You couldn't have known." After she left, I sat alone on the porch until darkness settled across the neighborhood. I thought about David, about every lesson he had tried to teach Ethan. Hard work, honesty, responsibility, admitting mistakes before they became disasters. Somewhere along the way, my son had forgotten one of those lessons. Instead of asking for help, he had begun searching for a shortcut, and that shortcut led directly to me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I accepted a painful truth. Ethan hadn't started asking about my estate because he wanted to prepare for my future. He had started asking because he believed my future was the only thing left that could save his own. That realization broke my heart, but it also gave me something I hadn't had before, a clear understanding of exactly what I was fighting to protect, not just my home, not just my savings, but the last chance my son still had to choose integrity before greed destroyed whatever remained of the man I had raised. For the first time since this ordeal began, I stopped asking myself one question: would Ethan really do this? Instead, I began asking a different one: how far is he willing to go? There was an important difference. Jonathan often reminded me that emotions cloud judgment. Facts did not, and the facts were pointing in one direction. Someone wanted control over my assets before I had the chance to discover why. The only way to uncover the truth now was to let them believe they were succeeding. 2 days later, I met Jonathan and Michael in Jonathan's conference room once again. Jonathan closed the door before speaking. "I think we're ready." "Ready for what?" "To let them make the next move." I frowned. "You mean pretend to cooperate?" He nodded. "They're under pressure. Pressure makes people impatient. The closer they think they are to achieving their goal, the more likely they are to make mistakes," Michael added quietly. "And mistakes leave evidence." I folded my hands together. "I don't enjoy deceiving my own son." "I know," Jonathan replied, "but you're not lying to hurt him. You're giving him every opportunity to tell the truth before it's too late." That distinction mattered. I wasn't setting a trap for revenge. I was creating one final chance for honesty. Together, we outlined a careful plan. I would call Ethan myself, not the other way around. I would apologize for delaying the paperwork. I would explain that Jonathan had been busy with other clients, so I hadn't been able to schedule a review. That part wasn't entirely false. Then I would tell him I had decided it was probably best to move forward. If he and Lauren truly believed they were close to obtaining my signature, they would likely return with the same documents, perhaps even additional ones. This time, however, everything would be different. Jonathan had already prepared a discreet digital scanner capable of capturing every page within seconds, once the documents were in our possession. Michael would examine every signature line, every revision, every page number, every staple hole, every printing mark. "If there's anything unusual," Michael said confidently, "I'll find it." I nodded slowly. "Let's do it." That afternoon, I called Ethan. He answered almost immediately. "Mom, I was just thinking about you. I imagine you were." He laughed. "So, have you made a decision?" "I have." There was a brief silence. "I think I may have overreacted." "You did. I've always trusted you. I suppose I became nervous because everything happened so quickly. His voice brightened noticeably. I understand completely. I've decided we should finish the paperwork. Another pause. This one sounded different. Not relief. Excitement. I can come over tonight. So can Lauren. Would tomorrow evening work instead? Of course. Whatever's easiest for you. His eagerness confirmed what Jonathan had predicted. After hanging up, I sat quietly for several minutes. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Yet something about Ethan's tone troubled me. He hadn't asked whether I still wanted an attorney to review the documents. He hadn't suggested scheduling an appointment together. He simply wanted me to sign. The following morning, Jonathan called. I've arranged something else. What? I'd like the meeting recorded. I looked surprised. Legally? Perfectly. In South Carolina, we'll handle this carefully. The purpose isn't to provoke anyone. It's simply to preserve exactly what is said. I trusted his judgment completely. A recording couldn't create the truth. It could only preserve it. Meanwhile, Michael continued his own investigation. Late that afternoon, he joined us carrying a slim gray folder. I found something interesting. He laid several documents on the table. They're public property records. I recognized my own address immediately. What am I looking at? Nothing has been transferred. That's the good news. I let out a quiet breath. But there were 2 recent requests. What kind of requests? Copies. Certified copies of your property's recorded deed. I stared at him. Who requested them? The requests were submitted online. The name listed was yours. But I never requested copies. I know. Michael slid another sheet across the table. The email address attached to the request wasn't yours either. Jonathan leaned forward. Can we trace it? Not directly. But the requests originated within 48 hours of the phone call impersonating Clara. The room fell silent. Someone had pretended to be me more than once. Not just with Jonathan's office, with county records as well. My heartbeat quickened. Why would anyone want copies of my deed? Jonathan answered calmly. Sometimes for legitimate reasons, and sometimes because they're gathering documents for something much larger. I swallowed hard. What kind of something? Financial transactions, loan applications, ownership verification, fraud. The word hung heavily in the room. Fraud. I never imagined hearing that word connected to my own family. That evening, alone at home, I wandered into David's old workshop behind the garage. Very little had changed since he passed away. His workbench remained exactly where he'd left it. Neatly arranged screwdrivers, carefully labeled drawers, a faded radio that no longer worked. On the wall hung a small wooden plaque he had carved years before. It read, "Character is what you choose when nobody is watching." I ran my fingers across the worn lettering. David had believed that success meant nothing without integrity. He used to tell Ethan that honesty wasn't tested when life was easy. It was tested when everything seemed to be falling apart. I wondered whether Ethan remembered those conversations, or whether fear had buried them beneath unpaid debts and impossible promises. A tear rolled down my cheek before I wiped it away. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about watching the values David and I had spent decades teaching our son slowly unravel. The next evening arrived. Right on time, Ethan and Lauren pulled into my driveway. Lauren carried the same leather portfolio I had seen before. Ethan held a bakery box. "Your favorite lemon cake," he said with a warm smile. I thanked them and invited them inside. We chatted over coffee for nearly 20 minutes. Neither of them mentioned paperwork. Almost as though they were waiting for me to do it. Finally, I smiled gently. "I suppose we should finish what we started." Lauren's expression brightened, almost imperceptibly. "I'll get everything ready." She opened the portfolio. Neatly organized documents appeared once again. Yellow tabs, highlighted signature lines, the same careful presentation. As I reached for the first page, I looked up at Ethan. He smiled back with complete confidence. He believed I was finally ready to sign. What he didn't know was that Jonathan and Michael were already preparing for the next stage, because before I wrote my name on a single line, Every page in that portfolio was about to reveal secrets neither Ethan nor Lauren realized they had left behind. Ethan looked more relaxed than I had seen him in months. As Lauren carefully arranged the documents across my dining room table, he leaned back in his chair and accepted another cup of coffee. For someone who claimed this was merely routine estate planning, he seemed remarkably invested in the outcome. I reminded myself of Jonathan's instructions. Stay calm, ask questions, never rush. Most importantly, let them reveal themselves. I adjusted my reading glasses and smiled. I appreciate both of you taking the time to help me, Lauren returned the smile. Of course, Mom. We're family. The word stung more than I expected. Family. It had always meant safety to me. Lately it felt more like uncertainty. Lauren slid the first document toward me. This one's exactly the same as before. I looked at the title, Durable Financial Power of Attorney. So this gives Ethan authority to help with my finances. Only if necessary, Lauren answered quickly. I nodded thoughtfully. And what defines necessary? Ethan jumped in. Oh, if you're sick, traveling, or just want me to handle things. Reasonable. Very reasonable. If someone stopped listening after those words, they might sign without hesitation. I continued reading. Near the bottom of the second page, one sentence caught my attention. The agent shall possess full authority to conduct any transaction available to the principal under applicable law. I tapped the paragraph. This seems broad. Lauren laughed softly. Legal language always sounds dramatic. Doesn't mean much. Jonathan had predicted that answer almost word for word. I looked up. If it doesn't mean much, then you won't mind explaining it. Lauren hesitated, only briefly. It simply covers situations lawyers can't predict. I smiled politely. I see. Then I turned another page. Halfway through the packet, something unusual appeared. A document I hadn't seen before. What's this? Lauren glanced toward Ethan before answering. Oh, that's just an updated beneficiary summary. I don't remember discussing beneficiary changes. We're not changing them. It's just confirming everything. I slowly read the page. The wording seemed harmless. Until I reached the final paragraph. It authorized future administrative corrections without additional signatures if clerical adjustments became necessary. I looked directly at Ethan. What kind of corrections? His smile stiffened. Probably spelling. Address updates. Nothing important, but it doesn't actually say that. Silence. Lauren quickly reached for the page. I think you're reading too deeply into standard wording. Instead of releasing the paper, I held onto it gently. I've spent most of my adult life reading contracts. I've learned that vague language is rarely accidental. Neither of them answered. The room became noticeably quieter. I decided it was time to move the conversation where Jonathan hoped it would go. I actually spoke with someone about estate planning. Ethan looked up immediately. You did? Yes. I wanted to understand the documents better. His smile disappeared. Who? A lawyer. Lauren's fingers froze on the edge of the portfolio. What did they say? I mostly asked general questions. I watched both of them carefully. The attorney explained that independent legal review is usually recommended before signing anything. Lauren forced a laugh. Well, any attorney would say that. It's how they make money. Ethan didn't laugh. He simply stared at the documents. Did you show anyone these papers? There it was. Not concern over my understanding. Concern over the documents themselves, I answered honestly. No. That much remained true. I hadn't shown Jonathan these copies. Not yet. Ethan visibly relaxed. So, are you comfortable signing now? I placed my pen on the table. Instead of picking it up, I folded my hands. I have a few more questions. Nearly 40 minutes passed. I asked about every document, every paragraph, every authorization. Some questions Ethan answered confidently. Others he struggled with. Lauren repeatedly stepped in whenever he hesitated. She often answered before he had the chance. More than once, they contradicted each other. When I asked whether the power of attorney became effective immediately, Ethan said no. Lauren quietly corrected him. It actually becomes effective upon execution." He quickly agreed. "Right. That's what I meant." Another time I asked who had drafted the paperwork. "Our attorney," Ethan answered. Lauren immediately added, "Actually, it's mostly standardized software." They exchanged an almost imperceptible glance. Tiny, barely noticeable, but enough. Years of supervising teachers had taught me to recognize silent communication. They weren't simply nervous. They were trying to stay consistent. Finally, I reached the signature page. Lauren uncapped an expensive fountain pen and slid it toward me. "This is the last step." My hand rested near the pen. Neither Ethan nor Lauren spoke. The silence itself became pressure. I looked at the signature line. Then I quietly asked, "Where are the witness signatures?" Lauren blinked. "What?" "There are spaces for 2 witnesses. They're blank." "Oh, we'll handle those afterward." I tilted my head. I thought witnesses were supposed to observe the signature. Again, silence. Ethan cleared his throat. "We know people at the office. They'll take care of it." Jonathan's warning echoed inside my mind. A legitimate attorney insists procedures are followed correctly. No shortcuts, no, "We'll handle it later." No missing witnesses. I gently set the pen back down. "I'd rather everyone sign together." Lauren's smile finally cracked. "It really doesn't matter. It matters to me." The warmth gradually disappeared from Ethan's face. His voice remained polite, but it had changed. "Mom, we've spent weeks trying to help." "I know. You trust Jonathan Hayes. I trust you. So why is this suddenly difficult?" Because trust isn't a substitute for transparency. The words stayed inside my head. Instead, I answered quietly, "I simply don't sign legal documents unless every requirement has been completed." For several long seconds, no one moved. Then Ethan leaned forward. His elbows rested on the table. His expression softened. "Mom, I'm under a lot of stress." The confession surprised me. "My business hasn't been easy lately." "I know. I've made mistakes." He lowered his eyes. "But I'm trying to fix everything. For the first time in weeks." He sounded genuine, not rehearsed, not polished, just tired. "I don't want to lose everything." My heart broke hearing those words. This was the opening I had hoped for, the moment when truth might finally replace deception. I reached across the table and gently covered his hand with mine. "Ethan, if you're in trouble, you don't have to hide it from me." He looked up. For a moment I saw the little boy who used to cry whenever he scraped his knees. His lips parted. I thought he was finally going to tell me everything. Instead, Lauren spoke first. "We're all under stress. This paperwork simply protects everyone." The moment disappeared. Ethan slowly withdrew his hand. His face closed again. The walls went back up. I realized then that someone else was influencing every decision he made. Someone who refused to let him tell the truth. I smiled softly and stood. "I think we should stop for today." Lauren looked stunned. "What?" "I need one more day. Just one." Ethan's disappointment was impossible to hide. "But I've already made arrangements." "So have I." I walked them to the front door. As Ethan stepped onto the porch, he turned back. "When can we come again?" I met his eyes. "Tomorrow evening. I promise." He nodded slowly. "All right. We'll be here." They drove away without another word. The moment their SUV disappeared around the corner, I closed the front door and locked it. Then I reached into my pocket and removed my phone. I dialed Jonathan. "They took the bait," I said quietly, and I think Ethan was about to confess. Jonathan didn't sound surprised. What stopped him? I looked through the window toward the empty driveway. "Lauren!" Another brief silence followed. Then Jonathan spoke the words that would change everything. "Good. Because tomorrow, we're not just reviewing documents anymore. We're confronting the truth." I barely slept that night. Not because I feared what Jonathan and Michael might discover. I feared what they already suspected. There is a unique kind of pain that comes from watching a stranger betray you. But watching your own child slowly become someone you no longer recognize, that pain settles into places words cannot reach. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Jonathan called. "Everything is in place." Michael finished his preliminary review. Already. He worked late. What did he find? I'd rather show you than tell you. An hour later, I sat once again in Jonathan's conference room. Michael had enlarged several pages from the documents Ethan and Lauren had brought the previous evening. I stared at them without immediately understanding what I was seeing. There, Michael said, pointing with a pen. Notice this page number. I leaned closer. Page 4, then page 5, then page 7. Where's page 6 inches? Michael nodded. Exactly. I checked the sequence 3 different times. The numbering jumps. I frowned. Maybe they printed it incorrectly. Possible, but very unlikely. He placed another enlarged copy beside it. The footer font changes here. I looked carefully. It was subtle. One section used slightly darker print. Another page showed different spacing between paragraphs. Then Michael pointed toward the staple holes. These pages weren't assembled at the same time. How can you tell? The pressure marks. The original packet was taken apart. Several pages were replaced. A chill spread through me. So the documents were altered. They were certainly reassembled. Jonathan folded his hands. The question becomes why? Michael reached for another folder. I believe I know. He carefully slid a single page toward me. This paragraph appears nowhere in the standard version of the form. I read it once, then again. My pulse quickened. It granted the appointed agent authority to transfer, sell, mortgage, or otherwise dispose of real property without additional approval from the principal. I looked up slowly. My house. Jonathan nodded. If signed, this clause would significantly expand Ethan's authority. I could hardly breathe. And Lauren kept telling me not to read every page, Michael answered quietly. That now makes sense. Jonathan wasn't finished. There was something else. He opened a sealed envelope. Inside were certified copies of public filing records Michael had requested. Yesterday afternoon, Jonathan said, we confirmed that no attorney whose name appears anywhere in these documents actually prepared them. I blinked. What do you mean? The law firm's name printed at the bottom? Yes, it exists. But those attorneys never drafted this packet. They confirmed it in writing this morning. My stomach tightened. So someone used their name. It appears so, Michael added. The formatting also differs from that firm's standard document templates. Everything suddenly became painfully clear. The rushed signatures, the missing witness lines, the altered pages, the fake legal formatting. None of it happened by accident. Jonathan looked directly at me. Clara, I believe someone intentionally assembled documents designed to give Ethan powers far beyond what you were told. The room became completely silent. I lowered my eyes. For several long moments, nobody spoke. Finally, I whispered, I kept hoping this was all one terrible misunderstanding. I know. Jonathan's voice was filled with genuine compassion, but hope should never replace evidence. Around noon, Michael's phone rang. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. When he returned several minutes later, his expression had changed. I have one more piece. What is it? Jonathan asked. I spoke with someone at the county recorder's office, the same employee who processed those deed copy requests. What did they say? Michael opened his notebook. The person requesting information wasn't working alone. My heartbeat quickened. There were 2 people present. Jonathan leaned forward. Can they identify them? They remembered one detail. What? The woman repeatedly referred to the older man beside her as our financial advisor. I frowned. Financial advisor? They didn't remember his name. They only remembered that phrase. Jonathan exchanged a long glance with Michael. A third person, he said quietly. Not just Ethan, not just Lauren. Someone else had been involved. Someone with enough financial knowledge to help navigate legal paperwork. My mind raced through possibilities. Business partner, consultant, investment advisor, whoever he was, he had remained completely invisible until now. Jonathan stood and walked toward the window. We've reached an important decision point. I looked at him. What do you recommend? I recommend giving Ethan one final opportunity. To confess, yes. And if he doesn't, Jonathan turned back toward me. Then we present the evidence. All of it. I swallowed hard. Will that destroy him? His answer came slowly. The evidence won't destroy him. His choices might. That afternoon, we carefully planned the evening meeting. This time, Jonathan would arrive after Ethan and Lauren. Not immediately. He wanted the conversation to unfold naturally first. Michael would come with him. The altered documents had been scanned, photographed, and preserved. Every page, every staple mark, every inconsistency. Nothing would disappear. If anyone tries to deny what they brought yesterday, Michael said confidently, we can prove exactly what was in that portfolio. Jonathan also prepared another folder. Unlike the documents Ethan carried, these were genuine, properly drafted, complete, legally valid. If Ethan truly intended only to help you, Jonathan explained, he'll have no objection to using authentic documents instead. And if he objects, that answer will tell us everything. As evening approached, I found myself wandering through David's old study. His photograph still sat on the bookshelf. I picked it up. You always believed Ethan would become an honorable man. My voice barely rose above a whisper. I still want to believe that. Tears blurred the smiling face in the picture. I just don't know whether he believes it anymore. The doorbell rang. Exactly 6 o'clock. I placed the photograph back on the shelf and wiped my eyes. When I opened the front door, Ethan stood there holding another bakery box. Lauren smiled politely beside him. You look nice today, Mom. Thank you. They entered the house as though this were an ordinary family visit. No one mentioned paperwork immediately. We sat in the living room, made small talk, drank coffee. Finally, Ethan looked at me. So, are we ready? I nodded. I think we are. Lauren immediately opened the leather portfolio. She removed the same packet, the same yellow tabs, the same marked signature lines. As she slid the papers toward me, I calmly folded my hands. Before I could speak, another knock echoed through the house. 3 firm knocks. Ethan froze. Lauren looked toward the front door. Neither of them had expected another guest. I'll get it, I said quietly. I opened the door. Jonathan Hayes stood on the porch wearing a navy suit, a leather briefcase in one hand. Beside him stood Michael Brooks carrying a gray evidence case. Jonathan looked past me toward the dining room where Ethan and Lauren sat waiting. Then he smiled politely. I hope we're not interrupting. I stepped aside. No, Jonathan. In fact, I've been expecting you. As Ethan slowly rose from his chair, every trace of color disappeared from his face. The family attorney had finally walked through the door, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed seemed to swallow the entire house. Ethan stood frozen beside the dining room table. Lauren's hand remained on the leather portfolio, but her confident smile had vanished. Jonathan stepped inside calmly, as though he were arriving for an ordinary business appointment. Good evening, everyone. Michael followed, carrying his gray case with quiet professionalism. No one answered. I closed the front door behind them. The click of the lock echoed through the foyer. For years, this house had been the place where birthdays were celebrated. Christmas presents were opened and Sunday dinners stretched late into the evening. Tonight it felt more like a courtroom. Jonathan placed his briefcase on the dining table. Thank you for inviting me, Clara. I thought it would be helpful if we reviewed these documents together. Ethan finally found his voice. Mom, you invited Jonathan? Yes, I decided I wanted independent legal advice. Lauren forced a polite smile. That's perfectly understandable. Of course. If you told us, we would have been happy to arrange something. Jonathan looked at her pleasantly. I'm sure. But Mrs. Warren has been my client for nearly 3 decades. I already know her estate better than anyone. The room fell quiet again. Jonathan remained standing. Before anyone signs anything, he said, I'd like to ask a few simple questions. Ethan crossed his arms. What kind of questions? The kind that should have been answered before these documents were ever presented. He picked up the first page. Mr. Warren, who drafted this power of attorney? Our attorney. Jonathan nodded. Name? Ethan hesitated. Lauren answered. The firm prepared standardized documents. Jonathan smiled politely. Which firm? Neither of them spoke. Jonathan turned the last page toward them. This law firm's name appears here. He tapped the printed logo. "We contacted them yesterday." Lauren's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "They confirmed these documents did not originate from their office." No one moved. Jonathan continued calmly. "So, I'd like to ask again. Who prepared these papers?" Ethan looked toward Lauren. Lauren looked back at Ethan. Finally, Ethan answered quietly, "I don't remember." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "You don't remember who prepared legal documents transferring broad financial authority over your mother's assets? It was handled online. By whom? I don't know." Michael quietly opened his evidence case. He removed several enlarged photographs. "I'd like everyone to look at these." He laid them across the table. Page numbers, staple marks, printing comparisons, different font spacing, the missing 6th page. Lauren frowned. "What is all this supposed to prove?" Michael spoke with measured confidence. "These documents were assembled from multiple sources. They were disassembled. Pages were replaced. They were then reassembled." Lauren immediately shook her head. "That's impossible." Michael calmly slid another photograph toward her. "This staple hole was made weeks before this one. The paper stock also differs." He pointed toward the enlarged images. "The footer formatting changes. The printer margins shift. The page numbering skips. There is no reasonable explanation unless someone altered the packet." Lauren folded her arms. "Maybe the copier malfunctioned." Michael smiled politely. "I've testified in document fraud cases for 27 years. I assure you, photocopiers don't remove page 6. Ethan lowered his eyes. Jonathan opened another folder. This paragraph. He highlighted the clause granting authority to sell or mortgage real property. Mrs. Warren was repeatedly told this paperwork merely allowed her son to help pay bills. He looked directly at Ethan. "Can you explain why this clause appears?" Ethan swallowed. I didn't read every page." Jonathan didn't raise his voice. "You expected your mother to sign documents you hadn't read?" "I trusted." He stopped himself. "You trusted whom?" Jonathan asked. Ethan looked toward Lauren again. She answered before he could. "We downloaded a standard estate planning package. We assumed everything was normal." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting." He reached into his briefcase and removed another document. "This is the actual standard version." He placed it beside theirs. The difference was immediately obvious. The expanded property authority clause wasn't there. Neither was the administrative correction language. Several paragraphs had been replaced entirely. Jonathan looked at Lauren. "Would you care to explain these additions?" Her face remained expressionless. "I don't know anything about that." "You brought the portfolio." "I simply organized paperwork. I didn't write it." For the first time that evening, Jonathan's expression hardened. "Mrs. Warren." "Someone did." The atmosphere shifted. No one was pretending anymore. I looked at my son. "Ethan." He slowly met my eyes. "I've asked you several times whether you're in financial trouble. You always change the subject." He remained silent. "I gave you opportunities to tell me the truth." Still nothing. I stood. "I don't care about the money. I care about you. If you've made mistakes, we can face them. But I cannot help you if you keep lying." For several long seconds, I thought he might finally speak. Instead, Lauren interrupted. "This has gotten completely out of hand," she stood abruptly. "We came here to help your mother. Now we're being treated like criminals." Jonathan answered evenly. "No one called you criminals. We're discussing altered legal documents." "That's different." Lauren grabbed the portfolio. "I think we're finished." Before she could close it, Michael quietly spoke. "Actually, we're not." He removed one final folder from his evidence case. "I'd like to show everyone something else." Inside were certified copies of county records and printed email logs. Jonathan slid them toward Ethan. "Recognize these?" Ethan looked confused. "No. These are requests for certified copies of your mother's deed. I never requested those. They were submitted using her name." "I didn't," Jonathan interrupted gently. "We're aware they weren't submitted from Mrs. Warren's email." He paused. "But they were submitted 2 days after someone called my office pretending to be her." Lauren's breathing became noticeably faster. Jonathan watched both of them carefully. We also know someone attempted to initiate an authorization request on one of Clara's investment accounts. I don't know anything about that, Ethan replied immediately. His answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Jonathan leaned forward. I'm curious. I hadn't mentioned which investment account. How did you know I wasn't referring to a bank account? Ethan froze, realizing too late what he had done. I was just guessing. No one believed him. For nearly a minute, the only sound in the room came from the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Finally, Lauren spoke again. This is ridiculous. Everything you're describing is circumstantial. You can't prove who submitted anything. Jonathan nodded. You're correct. Not yet. He closed the folder slowly, which is precisely why I've spent today forwarding this evidence to the appropriate investigators. Ethan's head snapped upward. What investigators? Jonathan's voice remained calm. The fraud department handling the unauthorized investment account request, the county office reviewing the false deed inquiry, and the law firm whose name appears without authorization on these documents. Lauren's confidence disappeared. You already reported this. I reported what the evidence required. No more, no less. I watched Ethan's shoulders slump. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked less like a confident financial advisor and more like an exhausted man carrying a burden that had finally become too heavy. His hands trembled slightly. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. Mom! His voice cracked. Lauren immediately reached for his arm. Ethan, don't. He gently pulled away from her. It was the first time all evening he hadn't looked to her before speaking. I felt my heart pounding. After weeks of half-truths, excuses, and carefully rehearsed answers, my son finally looked as though he had reached the point where the truth was no longer something he could outrun. No one spoke. The silence that filled my dining room felt heavier than every accusation that had come before it. Ethan remained standing beside his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor. Lauren reached toward him once more. He quietly stepped away. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was simply the first decision he had made that evening without looking to her first. Jonathan noticed it. So did Michael. And so did I. Ethan, I said softly, look at me. Slowly he raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot. His face looked years older than it had only a month earlier. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't see a confident financial advisor. I saw my little boy, terrified, broken, ashamed. I don't want another excuse, I told him. I don't want another explanation that avoids the truth. I just want honesty. If you give me that, we'll deal with everything else afterward. His lips trembled. Then he whispered two words I had been waiting weeks to hear. I'm sorry. Tears filled his eyes. I've been lying. Lauren immediately interrupted. Ethan, stop. He shook his head. No. You said we could fix this. You promised. She stared at him in disbelief. What are you doing? I'm done. His voice cracked. I'm tired. So tired. He slowly lowered himself back into the chair. For several moments, he simply stared at his hands. Finally, he spoke. It started almost 3 years ago. Jonathan quietly closed his notebook. No one interrupted. I had clients making incredible returns in private real estate developments. They all seemed successful. I thought I finally understood how wealthy people built wealth. He gave a bitter laugh. I convinced myself I could do the same. At first he invested only a small amount. The returns looked impressive. Then another opportunity appeared, and another. Soon he wasn't simply investing. He was borrowing to invest, leveraging future profits that hadn't yet existed. When the first project doubled, I thought I was brilliant. I believed I couldn't lose. He looked directly at me. You always told me to be careful. I stopped listening. As the developments expanded, Ethan accepted larger financial commitments. Banks approved loans because his income looked strong. Business partners praised his confidence. Everyone around him seemed convinced the market would continue climbing. Then interest rates changed. Construction stalled. Investors pulled out. Within months, every prediction collapsed. I kept thinking the next project would recover everything. It never happened. Jonathan nodded quietly. The classic escalation. Ethan closed his eyes. I borrowed more. Refinanced. Signed personal guarantees. I was trying to save previous investments, but I only made everything worse. His voice became almost inaudible. By last spring, I owed more money than I could ever repay. I listened without speaking. Not because I wasn't hurting, because I wanted him to tell all of it. Not just the parts that sounded sympathetic, the whole truth. I should have come to you. I know that now. But I couldn't. I was ashamed. I've spent my career telling people how to manage money. How could I admit I destroyed my own finances? He laughed bitterly. I couldn't even tell myself. Then his expression darkened. When collection notices started arriving, I panicked. I thought I'd lose my license, my reputation, my career, everything. So instead of asking for help, I looked for another solution. His eyes filled with tears again. I looked at your estate. My heart sank. There it was. The sentence I had dreaded hearing. I knew you had the house, the investments, the trust Dad built. I told myself that if I could just manage everything temporarily, I'd recover, I'd replace every dollar. You'd never know. He buried his face in his hands. I convinced myself it wasn't stealing. I kept calling it borrowing, but it wasn't. It was stealing. I turned slowly toward Lauren. She had remained completely still. Ethan says he looked at my estate. What about you? Her jaw tightened. I never wanted to hurt you. Jonathan spoke calmly. That wasn't the question. She looked away. At last, she sighed. I knew about the investments. I knew how much debt we had. More than debt, Ethan whispered. We were drowning. Lauren nodded. Yes, we were. She looked directly at me. I begged him to tell you. Ethan immediately looked up. That's not true. It is. You kept saying we could recover. You kept saying one more deal would fix everything. Jonathan quietly observed both of them. The blame had begun, exactly as he predicted. Lauren continued. When the bank started calling every day, I told him we had to do something. What kind of something, I asked. She hesitated. At first, I only wanted you to loan us money. I said nothing. But Ethan insisted you'd never agree to that amount. So he started talking about the power of attorney. Ethan immediately shook his head. I only mentioned it. You found the templates. Lauren stared back at him. You edited them? You contacted the websites. You said Jonathan would never approve. So we'd handle it ourselves. Their voices grew louder. You said it would only be temporary. You said she'd never even notice. No. You said we'd replace everything after refinancing. You told me your mother's estate was the only way out. The room erupted into overlapping accusations. You downloaded the documents. You changed the clauses. You kept rushing her. You told me not to let her read everything. I was trying to save us. You were trying to save yourself. Finally, Jonathan raised his hand. Enough. The room fell silent again. He looked first at Ethan. Did you knowingly present altered legal documents to your mother? Ethan's shoulders collapsed. Yes. Jonathan turned toward Lauren. Did you know the documents contained authority beyond what Clara had been told? Lauren closed her eyes. Yes. Neither answer surprised anyone anymore. They simply confirmed what we already knew. I remained seated. My tears had stopped. Not because the pain had ended, because it had become too deep for tears. Ethan, and he looked at me. When your father died, I worked 3 jobs. I sold my wedding jewelry. I missed holidays. I postponed retirement. I never regretted any of it. Do you know why? He shook his head. Because every sacrifice was made out of love. My voice trembled. And today, I learned my son was willing to sacrifice me. He immediately broke down. No. Mom, I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. I couldn't see another way. I nodded slowly. That's the tragedy. You stopped looking. For several long moments, no one moved. Jonathan quietly gathered the altered documents. Michael closed his evidence case. Neither man spoke. This was no longer about proving fraud. The truth had already been admitted. The only question remaining was what I would do with it. I looked at my son. He had confessed, not because he had been forced into a corner, but because somewhere beneath the fear, the little boy I had raised had finally remembered the difference between survival and integrity. Whether that realization had come too late, I still didn't know. No one moved after Ethan's confession. The grandfather clock in the hallway continued its steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. It reminded me that time never paused. Not for grief, not for betrayal, and certainly not for regret. Ethan sat with his head lowered, his shoulders shaking. Lauren stared silently at the dining table, no longer trying to defend herself. Jonathan quietly closed his briefcase. Michael remained where he was, saying nothing. They both understood that what happened next no longer belonged to lawyers or forensic examiners. It belonged to a mother. I stood slowly and walked toward the living room. On the mantel sat the photograph David and I had taken on our 25th wedding anniversary. He was laughing because I had said something ridiculous just before the camera flashed. For years, that picture had reminded me of everything we had built together. Tonight, it reminded me of something else. The promises we had made, not about money, about family. David and I had often talked about what we wanted to leave Ethan. Of course, we wanted him to inherit our home someday, our savings, our investments, but those things had never been the real inheritance. We wanted to leave him honesty, compassion, responsibility, the courage to admit failure before failure became deception. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had become buried beneath ambition and fear. I picked up the photograph and carried it back into the dining room. Ethan. He slowly looked up. This picture was taken 5 years before your father died. You remember that vacation? He nodded weakly. It rained almost every day. I smiled faintly. And your father kept saying the weather couldn't ruin people who loved each other. A tear rolled down Ethan's face. I remember. He also told you something on that trip. I watched him search his memory. Finally, he whispered, "Never trade your character for your comfort." Yes, you remembered. I forgot to live by it. I sat across from him. I've spent the last several weeks asking myself one question. How could my son betray me? He immediately shook his head. I know. I'm sorry. I raised my hand gently. Let me finish. He nodded. The answer isn't that you stopped loving me. His eyes widened. The answer is that fear became louder than love. He began crying again. I thought if I could fix everything before you found out, you'd never have to worry. I sighed softly. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself from disappointing me. He lowered his eyes. You're right. I know. Jonathan quietly stood. Clara, he said gently, before we discuss anything else, there are legal matters we need to address. I nodded. I understand. He opened a slim folder. Based on what has been admitted tonight, I strongly recommend several immediate steps. He outlined them carefully. The power of attorney documents would be formally rejected. My banks would receive updated fraud notices. The attempted authorization requests would remain under investigation. The law firm whose name had been misused would continue its own inquiry. Finally, Jonathan looked directly at me. The remaining question is whether you wish to pursue criminal charges. The room became completely still, and Ethan didn't even look up. I'll accept whatever you decide, he whispered. I deserve it. Lauren closed her eyes but said nothing. Michael quietly gathered his papers, giving me the privacy of silence. I looked at my son for what felt like a very long time. Then I spoke. When your father died, I was angry. Not at him, at the world. I learned something during that time. Bitterness has a way of making innocent people pay for guilty people's mistakes. Jonathan waited patiently. I don't want bitterness making another decision for this family. He understood what I meant before I finished speaking. You don't wish to seek criminal prosecution? Not today. Jonathan nodded. That's your decision. It is. I turned toward Ethan. Don't mistake mercy for permission. His eyes immediately met mine. I'm not protecting you from consequences. I'm choosing which consequences matter most. Ethan wiped his face with trembling hands. What happens now? I took a slow breath. You tell the truth. To everyone. The banks. Your partners. Your licensing board if necessary. No more lies. No more hidden documents. No more pretending tomorrow will magically fix yesterday. He nodded. I will. You sell whatever you can. The expensive SUV. The vacation property. The club membership. If you have to start over in a one-bedroom apartment, then that's where you start. I understand. You repay every legal debt honestly, and every moral debt through your actions. Again he nodded. I will. Then I said the hardest words I had spoken all evening. You will not receive $1 from me to rescue your investments. His face fell, not in anger, in acceptance. I know. If I give you money now, I teach you that deception works. I won't do that. I understand. I truly do. I turned toward Lauren. She had remained almost unnaturally quiet. I have one question. She looked at me. If Ethan had confessed 6 months ago, before the forged paperwork, before the lies, would you still have stayed beside him? Her answer came after a long silence. I don't know. It was probably the most honest thing she had said all night. I loved him, but I was terrified. I kept thinking if we just escaped the debt, everything would go back to normal. I shook my head gently. It never works that way. She quietly nodded. I know that now. Jonathan packed the final folder into his briefcase. I'll prepare updated estate documents. They'll include additional safeguards. Thank you. He looked toward Ethan. I also recommend independent legal counsel. I already contacted someone, Ethan admitted quietly. Jonathan looked surprised. When? This afternoon. I thought... He swallowed hard. I thought there was a chance tonight wouldn't go well. For the first time, Jonathan gave him a small nod of approval. That was a wise decision. After Jonathan and Michael left, the house became quiet once again. Lauren stood near the front door. I think I should leave. Ethan looked at her. So should I. I walked them both outside. The night air felt cooler than usual. Neither of them spoke as they reached the driveway. Just before getting into his SUV, Ethan turned back toward me. Mom? Yes. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. But I hope someday I can earn your trust again. I looked at the man standing before me. He was no longer the confident advisor who believed every problem could be solved with another investment. He looked like someone who had finally run out of excuses. Trust isn't given because someone apologizes. It's earned because someone changes. A tear slid down his cheek. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can. I watched them drive away into the darkness. For weeks I had imagined this moment ending with anger, with revenge, with shouting. Instead, it ended with something far more difficult. Responsibility. My son still had an enormous debt to repay. Not just to banks, not just to the law, but to himself. Whether he could ever repay that debt, only time would answer. 1 year later, it amazed me how much life could change in 12 months. The house felt peaceful again, not because everything had been repaired. Some things never returned to what they once were. But peace doesn't always come from restoring the past. Sometimes it comes from finally accepting the truth. Every morning, I still made coffee in David's favorite mug. I still watered the roses he had planted. I still sat on the back porch watching the sunrise over the marsh. The difference was that I no longer spent those quiet mornings wondering what my son might be hiding. There were no more secret phone calls, no more rushed documents, no more carefully rehearsed conversations. Only honesty, painful honesty, but honesty nonetheless. Jonathan had kept his promise. Within weeks of everything that happened, he completely rewrote my estate plan. Every document was reviewed line by line. Additional safeguards were added. Any future power of attorney would require certification from my personal attorney and independent witnesses. Property transfers would require direct confirmation from me. Every financial institution received updated fraud protections. My assets were secure again. Jonathan smiled after our final meeting. I hope you never need any of these protections. So do I. But I'm grateful they're there. He nodded. The best legal documents are the ones that never become necessary. I couldn't argue with that. Ethan had also kept his promise. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly. Within days of his confession, he informed his business partners about the failed investments. He voluntarily disclosed the financial problems affecting his practice. Several clients left, others stayed. The licensing board reviewed his conduct. Because there had been no completed fraud, no client funds had been stolen, and Ethan had voluntarily reported his own misconduct before the investigation concluded, he was permitted to continue practicing under strict professional monitoring and additional ethics requirements. The consequences were severe. His income dropped dramatically. His reputation suffered, but his career survived. Barely. Jonathan later told me that Ethan's immediate confession and full cooperation had made an enormous difference. For the first time in months, the truth had actually protected him, not deception. Lauren's life changed just as dramatically. The consulting company connected to the failed development officially dissolved. Every remaining asset was liquidated. There was almost nothing left. She resigned from her position and found work managing a small accounting office across town. She and Ethan sold nearly everything they couldn't afford. The luxury SUV disappeared. The expensive country club membership ended. Designer furniture was auctioned. Their large home was sold. They moved into a modest two-bedroom apartment. When Ethan first told me, he looked embarrassed. I'm 43 years old. I feel like I'm starting over. I looked at him quietly. Starting over, honestly, is never something to be ashamed of. He didn't answer immediately. Then he smiled. I think Dad would have said the same thing. He probably would have. For almost 4 months after that night, Ethan never asked me for money. Not once. He never hinted, never complained, never suggested I rescue him. Instead, he worked. Sometimes 12 hours a day, sometimes more. He accepted consulting jobs that paid far less than the work he once considered beneath him. On weekends, he taught financial literacy classes at the local community college. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. One evening, he laughed softly. I spend half my class explaining why people should never make the mistakes I made. And do they listen? Some do. I hope more of them do than I did. It wasn't the laughter of a man avoiding responsibility. It was the quiet humility of someone finally willing to learn from his own failures. Our relationship recovered slowly, painfully slowly. At first, our conversations lasted only a few minutes, mostly about ordinary things, the weather, my garden, football, books. Neither of us rushed deeper conversations. Trust isn't rebuilt with grand speeches. It's rebuilt through consistency, week after week, month after month. One Saturday morning, Ethan arrived carrying a toolbox. What are you fixing? I asked. The porch railing. I noticed it's getting loose. You didn't have to come all the way over for that. I know. I wanted to. For 3 hours, we worked side by side, sometimes talking, sometimes not. It reminded me of the afternoons David used to spend teaching Ethan how to repair things around the house. Before leaving, Ethan quietly handed me an envelope. What's this? He looked almost embarrassed. The first repayment. I frowned. What repayment? I calculated every legal fee you paid because of me. Jonathan. Michael. Everything. I know you never asked, but I owe it. Inside was a cashier's check. Not a large amount, just $500, but I understood immediately what it represented. Not money, character. He wasn't trying to buy forgiveness. He was accepting responsibility. I pushed the envelope back toward him. I won't take this. His face fell. Mom, listen to me. I don't need reimbursement. What I need is for you to keep becoming the man your father believed you already were. His eyes filled with tears. I'll never stop trying. I know. A few weeks later, something happened that surprised me. Lauren called. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost declined. Then I remembered what bitterness had nearly done to all of us, so I agreed. She looked different when we met. The expensive clothes were gone. So was the polished confidence that had once seemed almost effortless. She looked tired, older, more genuine. "I owe you an apology," she said, before ordering anything. "You do." "I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times. She gave a sad smile. "But every version sounded like another excuse. I don't want excuses anymore." "Neither do I," she nodded. I let fear become my compass. I kept telling myself I was protecting my marriage, but really, I was protecting a lifestyle. Her honesty caught me off guard. I should have stopped Ethan. Instead, I helped him justify what we both knew was wrong. She looked down at her coffee. "I'll regret that for the rest of my life." I studied her quietly. Regret was written all over her face. Not dramatic regret, not performative regret, the quiet kind that follows people long after everyone else has stopped talking about their mistakes. "I forgive you," I said softly. She looked up in surprise. "Really? I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. I know. It simply means I refuse to let resentment control what's left of my life." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you." That evening, after returning home, I stood in David's workshop once again. The wooden plaque still hung above the workbench. "Character is what you choose when nobody is watching." For months I had looked at those words as a reminder of everything Ethan had forgotten. Now, I saw them differently. Character wasn't proven by never falling. It was revealed by what someone chose after they had fallen, and for the first time in a very long while. I believed my son was finally choosing the harder path, the honest one. 2 years later, Charleston looked especially beautiful that autumn morning. Golden leaves drifted across the sidewalks as sunlight reflected off the harbor, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I found myself looking toward the future instead of over my shoulder. Life had settled into something quieter, not perfect, but genuine. The house still echoed with memories of David, yet those memories no longer carried the weight of unfinished grief. Instead, they reminded me that a good life is measured less by what we accumulate than by the people we become. Today was proof of that. Nearly 18 months earlier, Jonathan had asked me an unexpected question. "If you could turn this entire experience into something good," he had said, "what would it look like?" At first, I didn't know how to answer. How could betrayal ever become something meaningful? How could deception possibly leave behind hope? The answer came while I was cleaning David's old workshop. I found a notebook filled with lesson plans from the years he volunteered to mentor young tradespeople. Inside the cover, he had written one sentence: "The greatest investment is always another person's future." I sat there for nearly an hour reading his notes. He had believed education could change lives long after money had been spent. That afternoon, I called Jonathan. "I know what I want to do. That's it." Now standing outside the Charleston Community Education Center, I looked up at the newly installed bronze plaque, the David Warren Scholarship for Integrity and Service. Below it were smaller words, awarded annually to students who demonstrate character resilience and commitment to serving others despite personal hardship. Not academic perfection, not wealth, not popularity, character. David would have loved that. Jonathan joined me on the front steps. "You made the right decision." "I hope so. You already have 63 applicants." I smiled in surprise. "That many. Apparently integrity still attracts people." I never doubted it. He laughed quietly. Neither did David. The dedication ceremony filled the auditorium with teachers, students, community leaders, and former colleagues from my years as principal. Many people remembered David. Others had never met him, yet every person there understood why the scholarship existed. Not because of the money, because of the values behind it. Jonathan spoke first, then the school superintendent. Finally, they invited me to the podium. As I looked across the audience, my eyes found Ethan sitting quietly in the third row. Lauren sat beside him. Neither occupied the front. Neither sought attention. They had come simply to be present. I unfolded my speech, then quietly folded it again. Instead, I spoke from my heart. My husband believed success without integrity was simply failure wearing a better suit. A few soft smiles appeared throughout the audience. He also believed every mistake contains two possibilities: the opportunity to become bitter or the opportunity to become wiser. I paused. I've seen both. I can tell you from experience that wisdom costs less than bitterness. The room remained completely silent. Money can build houses. It can purchase comfort. It can create opportunity. But only character creates trust. And once trust is broken, it can never be repaired with money. Only time, only humility, only consistent actions. I looked briefly toward Ethan. He lowered his eyes. Then I continued. So today we celebrate something far greater than financial success. We celebrate the courage to choose honesty when dishonesty seems easier. The audience rose in applause, not because my words were extraordinary, because everyone understood them. After the ceremony ended, students and families gathered in the courtyard. The first scholarship recipient was a young woman named Hannah Brooks. Her father had died while she was in high school. She worked evenings at a grocery store to help support her younger brothers while maintaining excellent grades and volunteering at a local food pantry. When she accepted the award, she said something that reminded me so much of David that I nearly cried. I don't want this scholarship to make my life easier. I want it to make me worthy of the trust someone placed in me. Jonathan quietly leaned toward me. That's exactly why this scholarship exists. I nodded. It is. Later that afternoon, after everyone had left, Ethan approached me. He carried no documents, no folders, no hidden agenda, only 2 paper cups of coffee. Thought you might need this. I probably do. We sat together on a bench overlooking the small garden behind the education center. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. I finished paying off the last personal guarantee. I turned toward him. You did. He nodded. It took almost 2 years. I sold everything I didn't need. I worked every weekend. I taught extra classes. But yesterday, I made the final payment. I smiled. Your father would be proud of that. I hope so. He'd probably tell me I should have listened sooner. I laughed softly. Without question, he laughed too. Then his expression grew serious. I've been meaning to ask you something. What is it? Jonathan told me you changed your estate plan. I did. I don't want to know numbers. I don't want to know amounts. I only want to know one thing. I waited. Am I still in it? It was the question I knew would eventually come. I looked out across the quiet garden before answering. Yes. He stared at me in surprise. Yes. Tears immediately filled his eyes. I don't deserve that. No, not because you're my son. He looked confused. Then why? Because inheritance isn't a reward. It's a responsibility. I reached into my purse and handed him a sealed envelope. Jonathan had prepared it months earlier. Inside was a simple letter. Ethan opened it carefully. He read silently, then looked back at me. The estate hadn't been divided equally as it once had. Instead, Jonathan had established a carefully structured family trust. Ethan would never receive unrestricted control over the assets. The home could never be sold without independent oversight. The scholarship fund would always receive its annual support first. Future grandchildren's education had been permanently protected, and one sentence appeared near the end of the letter. Inheritance shall always remain a tool for stewardship, never a shortcut around responsibility. Ethan read that sentence twice. Then he folded the letter. It's perfect. I thought your father would approve. He absolutely would. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Thank you. Not for the inheritance. For giving me the chance to become someone worthy of protecting it. I placed my hand gently over his. Never forget something, Ethan. What? I almost lost my savings. You almost lost your career. But the greatest thing either of us nearly lost was you. Neither of us spoke after that. We simply sat together as the afternoon sun settled over Charleston. For the first time in years, silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Because trust once shattered had not magically returned. It had been rebuilt, one honest decision at a time, one difficult conversation at a time, one act of responsibility at a time. And perhaps that was the greatest legacy David had left behind. Not money, not property, not even the scholarship that now carried his name. His greatest legacy was reminding us that a person's true wealth is measured by the character they choose when no one is watching. If this journey taught me anything, it's that love and trust are not the same thing. Love may survive terrible mistakes, but trust must be earned every single day through honesty, accountability, and consistent action. The people closest to us are capable of disappointing us in ways strangers never could, yet they are also capable of changing if they are willing to face the truth without excuses. Forgiveness is not pretending that nothing happened. It is choosing not to let someone else's failure define the rest of your life. At the same time, forgiveness should never require abandoning wisdom. Healthy boundaries and genuine compassion can exist together. You can protect yourself while still leaving the door open for someone to become better. Money comes and goes. Houses can be bought and sold. Careers can be rebuilt. But character is the one investment that continues to pay dividends throughout a lifetime. Every difficult choice we make shapes not only our future, but the legacy we leave behind for those who come after us. If Clara and Ethan's story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Clara's place? Would you have made the same choice? If you enjoy emotional family stories filled with suspense, difficult decisions, and meaningful endings, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story.